Hello, everyone, and welcome to MaMa's LiveTalks. This is our monthly series of panel discussions with artists, leaders, activists, and people shaping our world right now. Thank you so much for joining us. I am here right now with folks from Yara Arts Group. We have Virlana Tkacz, Julian Kaitasti, and poet Bob Holman, and we're going to discuss basically what is happening in Ukraine right now and the role that artists are playing in our society at the moment. So I invite you all to introduce yourselves, tell me a little bit about where you're coming from, and I'd like to hear how you're processing what is happening in Ukraine right now.
Okay, well, maybe I should start first. My name is Virlana Tkacz, and I'm the director of Yara Arts Group, a resident company at MaMa. And in 1990, Ellen Stewart, the mama of MaMa, encouraged me to go to Ukraine because we were invited to do a piece we had done at MaMa about a Ukrainian theater director. And that's how my journey to Ukraine started in a very serious way. You know, we did a show with 7 young Americans and 7 young locals about a theater director from the 1920s. And we opened in August 1991 at the National Theater in Kiev. And that was the day that the coup in Moscow happened. And so it was probably the most momentous week in Ukrainian history since until this week. Because by Friday, when we closed in Kiev, the Ukraine had declared independence. And so I've worked a lot with people from Ukraine, and one of the people, and also Ukrainians locally. So one of the people we've worked with constantly was Julian Kaitasti.
I come to the music that I play through a family tradition. My father and grandfather were bandura players who came to America as refugees after World War II. And I've been playing this instrument all my life, and most recently playing with Yara Arts Group and participating in a lot of these projects that we've done in Ukraine, where, you know, I have, you know, you asked how we're processing this. It's awfully hard. We have hundreds of friends there, hundreds, and some are, most are staying in the cities that are now under attack. Others are already refugees. And I hope we will, I hope to hear from them and see them again soon.
Thank you, Julian. And Bob, how about you?
Well, Julian, you should have introduced me, because that's how I got really introduced. Well, I knew Virlana, but Julian's bandura playing has inspired me to write a lot of poems. I'm Bob Holman, the founder of the Bowery Poetry Club. I've worked at the New Eurekan and the Poetry Project at St. Mark's. I'm a real old-time Lower East Side poet, and living in what Google Maps now calls the Ukrainian village is a place of home for me. My grandparents left Kamyanets-Podolsky, a little town below Lvov that I've been to thanks to Yara Arts, and immigrated to the US during the pogroms. So I'm that Jewish Ukrainian coal miner from Kentucky mix, and I found a place with Virlana's aesthetic and Julian's extraordinary artistry, along with our compatriot Susan Hwang, who's a Korean-American accordion player. So it could be nothing but Ukrainian. All of us feeling this unbelievable absurdity that gets bloody very fast, and especially keeping in touch with Virlana's doing translations of the posts from Serhiy Zhadan, who's our dear friend and collaborator and one of the great poets of Ukraine, who's sending us messages that during this session we'll be able to transmit to all of you. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you, Bob. It's powerful to hear about individual connections to Ukraine right now, and I'm sure historically, I mean, this is not something that we ever hoped would be happening again, given the history. I would love to hear about, Julian makes me think of the rich history of art in Ukraine. I'm thinking of weaving and embroidering to literature to poetry. How has Ukrainian art played a role in your life, and what do you think of the cultural intermingling of art and history there?
Well, you know, in my life, it's been it was my way of finding my personal place in North American society. Growing up a child of immigrants, of post-World War II refugees, and once I discovered the depth of the art of Ukraine, not just traditional arts, not just the traditional music that I heard growing up from my father and grandfather, but also the art of the 20th century, the art of the incredible cultural revivals that happened several times over the centuries and were cut short by the colonial power. Once I started discovering those things for myself, it defined my path in life and what I do, what I've committed myself to.
And Virlana, how did this lead to tell me about the founding of Yara Arts and that incredible story you've shared before about the first production that you brought with Ellen Stewart to Ukraine?
Well, unlike Julian, I did not come from a traditional background. Rather, my family was all fascinated with the avant-garde of the 20s, and in particular, some of the writers, and that was much more something that I felt at home with. And so I wrote my thesis at Columbia University, a master's degree, because in theater directing, on Lech Kurbas, who was this director in the 1920s in Kiev and Kharkiv, who I thought I'd write a thesis quickly, you know, over the weekend, because there were only a couple of books on him at that point. And of course, I've been involved with it all my life. And but at that point, we started making a piece about the dreams of his actors in 1919 during these horrible urban warfare situations, and our actors in 1990 in New York. And they were very similar. It is the dreams of young people of how to create a new world on stage. And then they went ahead and did amazing things with it. And that our piece was about that. And that's the piece that I got then invited to bring to Ukraine. And I went alone the first time because I had never been to Ukraine. And I went to Kharkiv, which is now the center of the battleground. There was one actor still living at that point from that company. And he was extremely elderly, to say the least. And he took me to a yard of a building which had been built for writers and artists in 1930. And he said, over there, you see that light? That's Ticina writing a new poem. And over there is Kurbas creating a new theater piece. And over there, Khvylevey will be shooting himself. And the reason Khvylevey was shooting himself in 1933, because all his friends were getting arrested. And almost everyone in that building was arrested. Many of them were shot, and others were in labor camps for years. And that whole movement was totally destroyed. But that second in that yard really made Ukraine come alive for me, because otherwise I saw Soviet Union and I had no experience with any of that. That was just so weird, quite frankly, you know, and that really made the moment of this dream of what art could be, what life could be. And you won't believe this, but last November, I had a residency in that building because the Literary Museum of Kharkiv managed to get one of the apartments in that building on the first floor, not the fourth floor where Korbas lived, but still I could see into his windows. And it was truly one of the most moving things for me. And of course, what's a residency? For literary people, for theater people, means you bring your whole company over and you start making things, which is what we did. We started working on a jazz musical with Anthony Coleman, who's, you know, lives here on the Lower East Side with us, based on a score we discovered from the 29 that everybody said was lost. So it was an incredible kind of circle come true. And in a week, I was supposed to leave for we did Act 1 in November. We're supposed to do Act 2, March 17th to the 27th. We were all getting ready to go when this all happened.
Do you have plans?
Of course, we all have plans. The question is, what are other people's plans too? Because this is what Ukrainian history teaches you. Just because you have plans doesn't mean the world will agree. That's what imperial and politics are like.
Yeah, and you've spoken about Yara Arts as an organization that is focused, you know, not only on uplifting Ukraine and Eastern European voices, but actually fighting imperialism and drawing attention to colonial structures that still exist. And
yeah, I thought the right before the war started, one of the strongest statements to me in the UN was actually by the representative from Kenya, the ambassador from Kenya, who started saying, what I hear is imperialism talking. And I thought, wow, thank you.
Yeah, and so much of the world not necessarily recognizing that imperialism has a loud voice that is still speaking.
Yes.
Until, you know, this past week. So I'm curious, I mean, I've known Yara Arts' productions to have been incited, I think, as you described, protests even in Ukraine. What do you think about the possibility of artists to either enact social change or serve as protest? And what is our responsibility right now?
I think our responsibility is to tell the truth. That is the most important thing. And that is what Zhadan says always too. It is what we live for and what we die for, is to tell the truth as we see it.
And Bob, for you, how does poetry play into that, and language and text, whether from in relation to Ukraine or otherwise?
Well, first, you know, just to acknowledge that what we live for, what we die for, as Virlana said, is actually the name of Zhadan's latest book of poetry. You know, the poetry is so interwoven that it gives poets have a real job when you're like Zhadan. I mean, there's a lot of places around the world, but we're speaking right now. Yesterday, Zhadan was quoted in the Washington Post as saying, this is especially directed to the Russian-leaning population in Kharkiv, which is an extremely mixed and marvelous city. I've never been there, but I have because of Zhadan's writings, his novel. Is it called Mesopotamia, Virlana?
No, it's Orphanage is what you're thinking of, the one that...
Orphanage. So anyway, it's like, it's such a circus of humanity in Kharkiv. But here's what he says to the people Russianly. He says, well, look, if you get hit by a bullet, it will have been shot by the Russians. And you know what? I don't think you want to get hit by a bullet. So, and there it is. There's a, you know, It's not saying to them, please get on a bus and go back to Moscow. It's saying, just realize the reality of this situation. So I'm going to read this poem by Zhadan that was published in the New York Times Magazine last summer. It's called Headphones. Sasha, a quiet drunk, an esoteric, a poet, spent the entire summer in the city. When the shooting began, he was surprised. Started watching the news, then stopped. He walks around the city with headphones on, listening to golden oldies as he stumbles into burned out cars, blown up bodies. What will survive from the history of the world in which we lived will be the words and music of a few geniuses who desperately tried to warn us, tried to explain, but failed to explain anything or save anyone. These geniuses lie in cemeteries, and out of their rib cages grow flowers and grass. Nothing else will remain, only their music and songs, a voice that forces you to love. Now you can choose to never turn off this music. Listen to the cosmos. Shut your eyes. Think about whales in the ocean at night. Hear nothing else. See nothing else. Feel nothing else. Except, of course, for the smell of corpses. He said that's Headphones, as translated by Virlana and Wanda Phipps from the Ukrainian.
Thanks for reading that.
Thank
We'll
you.
be reading some of these poems tonight, at our event. As a matter of fact, most of the things we will read will be from Zhadan.
And can you explain Zhadan's connection with Yara Arts?
Well, I met him when he was a very young poet in 2002. And he wrote a poem about that building, that very building I told you the story where the artist lived. And I saw it and I thought, oh, this is somebody I need to talk to, because so I sought him out and found him, and we've been working together ever since.
Recently, Virlana and MaMa brought Zhadan and his band. Of course, he's a rock and roll poet too, and he's got a punk band with horns. That's what Ukrainian punk bands must have horns. They came to MaMa and did an incredible performance of their album, and using the book of Timothy Snyder, who's such an incredible historian, activist, and who supports Yara also, but has used his book on tyranny as a portion of that play. So he's really is the poet laureate of Yara.
Oh, definitely.
And maybe poet laureate of Ukraine, like he's being talked with about Shevchenko, who is noted as the poet laureate of Ukraine. But anyway, who cares about that? The poems are what counts. And his Facebook posts, are poems.
Right. Yeah, I've been translating them, and they're also probably going to be part of the event. I was going to talk to you about it today. And they're also on my Facebook in translation, if people want to see it, because they're very powerful, because it's day by day what's happening in Kharkiv, and he's one of the people who's really trying to keep the city together.
It's really I'm so struck by that poem you read, Bob, because it feels like I've been reading the news, and that is unlike anything that I have heard. It is an alternate poetry, and text is an alternate source of truth and understanding. And I'm looking at these Facebook posts from Zhadan that Virlana has translated. And if I could just read a section from this very first one from February 27th, which is only a few days ago, he's saying, "The sky over Kharkiv is big and clear, the stars as large as walnuts. You can see all the constellations. It's very quiet, no shelling. Hope it stays like this. Good night. And as simple as that,
You know what William Carlos Williams said, it's difficult to find the news in poetry, but people die. There's an adverb here. People die every day for lack of what is found there. You can't find the news in the newspaper like you can find the news in Zhadan. And if the news in Zhadan were the real news, then there wouldn't be this war, So that's what art does when it lays itself down like he did in that poem, which was written a couple of years ago, but it is so, it's so timely. It's what's happening right now. People stumbling into cars, stumbling over dead bodies. That's the landscape of Ukraine now. And he's
right. Because when he wrote it was the landscape of Donetsk, of Eastern Ukraine, the regions that were just, taken in 2014, 15, and now this war has been going on for 8 years for Ukraine. It's just now it's total war. Before it was just in this one area. And this is what he was writing about then and was trying to really drag everybody's attention to. And now we are all just mesmerized by the heartlessness of this event.
How are you feeling about or processing the fact that the world is suddenly turning its attention on Ukraine when arguably the country and its art and wonders haven't been given their proper due, at least in American mainstream until now?
Well, I think in the beginning it was just overwhelming, but now you just have to sort of choose where you're focusing because it is so overwhelming in the long run. This is not stuff you want to be known for in terms of a crisis and refugees and everything else. But if we bring attention to the refugee crisis in the world, we would have done our work too. It is protecting our homeland, but it is protecting all the people who are now in crisis.
Julian, can you tell us, I'm still thinking about you playing the bandura earlier, which you're going to so kindly lead us out of today's conversation a little later with, and thinking of Bob mentioning the punk band. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us about the music of Ukraine and the contrast between imagining Zhadan's punk music and the peaceful instrument you were playing earlier?
Well, it's a big culture. It has all those strands in it. In fact, in the Soviet period, Ukrainian culture was basically relegated to this village traditional kind of thing. Those were the things that were allowed so long as they didn't get expressly political or historical or anything like that. And the contemporary culture was kind of tamped down, just so that there wouldn't be a culture in the Soviet space that competed with the Russian, right? And but it's all there, there's and after independence, of course, there's there's this incredible outburst of artists, writers, musicians, poets, bands, new genres of music, genres that marry some of the folkloric element with contemporary music. I'm thinking of the band Dacha Bracha, which is quite well known outside of Ukraine now. But there's just an immense amount of young performers who are doing wonderful things and are starting to get. We're starting right up until the beginning of this war. We're starting to break through into the into the global mainstream. So yeah, it's a big culture. It has room for all of those things, and I thought actually the show that we did here in New York with Yara with Serhiy Zhadan and his band, and then my music for a group of actors performing the poetry of a poet from 100 years ago, Pavlo Tkacz, and interweaving those two strands. Tkacz talking about the war of that time, Zhadan talking about the Donetsk war, and doing it with such these totally different musical textures and putting them together like that. That's what made a totally great piece.
And Virlana, you've produced Kolyada winter songs every year, right? Or mostly every year?
I think every other, but yes. Oh. I think every other, but yes. But so yes, I've worked with traditional arts also. But I was only interested in Ukrainian avant-garde. It was my trip to Buryatia, to Siberia, that really got me interested in traditional culture. And I began to realize that every bad year in their history is a bad year in our history, and it's not our history's fault. It was the imperial policies were changing, and that's what did that. And same thing in Kyrgyzstan when I worked there. You begin to see things, you begin to see patterns, of how governments try to pressure and change culture.
I'm also interested in how you perform all over the world, and this is a question for any of you. How do you feel like the place in which you're performing, whether that be a city in Ukraine or in the US, affects the work, either the final product you're presenting or the process in which you're creating it? How does the place where you are infuse the work that you're producing?
If I could go and talk about it, because that's kind of at the center of what we do, really, is how do you make bilingual work? And we perform in 2 languages on stage at the same time, without translation, but rather how do you make it so crystal clear about what everybody's saying that you don't need translation? Because acting, you don't act only in words, you act with your whole body and everything. And that focus of the other actor really helps translate what you're saying or to the audience. It helps convey it, And it was discovering that kind of process of layering the languages and peoples and cultures and sort of really bringing the other group's expertise into when you're dealing with a culture that really is at the heart of Yara. And we have worked with Ukrainian culture because I'm bilingual, so that was kind of the first step for me. But then I've worked with other cultures, where I really had to put a tremendous amount of effort to understand either Burya, which is a Mongolian language, or Kyrgyz, which is a Turkic language. And how do you look into their traditional cultures and see things that speak to you as an American, really? And then how do I bring that to an American audience? That has been sort of the purpose of my life, I guess.
Wow.
Now that I've said it, it must be so.
Pravda, truth.
Yes, truth. But I really thought it was really important to bring, to me, culture is a dialogue with history. And to make something alive for the future, you must speak to the past. And that's kind of, I think, what we all try to do, is sort of become that link that safety pin between generations, between cultures, between time zones, between times and eras. And how do we make that come alive? To me, that is so La Mama.
Yeah, I'm thinking of this quote I always heard from, well, quote is a strong word, but I've always heard that Ellen Stewart had the idea that if you're watching a show in another language and you can't understand it, it's not you, it's the show. The show needs to change.
Yeah, she said, baby, you people in China are gonna understand that show. If not, it's not a La Mama show. I don't want to hear it. No more talk, 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 talk.
A legend, a legend. And I mean, that's something that's the role that art is able to rise to, is creating the link between, you know, what we're doing on stage, what we're saying, what we're performing is the link between the past and the future. We have to embody it and we have to make it accessible to people, which I think is so wonderful about what you're doing with bilingual performances from different places. And I'd love to hear more of how La Mama has felt, La Mama and the East Village at large has felt like a home for each of you in your performance lives. Bob, do you want to take a start because you have such a connection to the Ukrainian village?
Oh yeah, well, you know, New York is it true? Is it true, Yael, that there is an artist drain now from New York to Los Angeles? That the young artists are moving out there have had it with the COVID riddled Midtown, etc.
Oh God, I hope not, because they're all going to have to buy cars. If it's happening, they're not telling me, but
Oh, good. Okay, I wanted to get the word straight from whatever the millennials. Wanted to get the millennial bon mot. So it's living culture. It's alive here, and the palimpsests that remain speak to the generations that are here. By the way, I've remembered my adverb. It was miserably. People die miserably from lack of what is found there, trying to find poetry in the news. I mentioned in passing there the intros that I worked for these 3 poetry organizations. Where else can you find 3 poetry organizations like the Poetry Project and the New Eurekan and the Bowery Poetry Club? It's infused my life. I love listening to Virlana because she talks about dreams. She talks about things that she wants to have happen, and there's a purposefulness and intention in it. And then you just set yourself up around to do it. You don't work at it head on. You work on it through all parts of your body and all the nerve endings, and come around from the side and discover that Vladivostok was the center of culture in 1920, which is something that we had predicted when we were working on our last play, but then found out that it was actually true. So it's, but it's not fun and games all the time. That's where we are right now. There's a playfulness in the way that we improvise and work together that allows us to create this art. But war stops that kind of improvisation. I mean, Zhadan is writing about the dailiness of it, and that's so good to hear. But the dailiness of it, when you're listening to bombs land around you, doesn't give you. How long ago was it, Virlana, that you were doing a Zoom rehearsal in Ukraine, and then all of a sudden it was we don't know whether what's going to happen tomorrow. Am I right? Is that what happened?
Right, but that was last week.
Well, can you tell that story?
Well, we were doing a series of Zoom. It was the 135th anniversary of the director whose work I mentioned many times, Lech Kurbas. on the 25th of February. And so every week, for 3 weeks, we had done these huge exhibits, art exhibits about, and how do you show theater and a director's concepts in a museum exhibit. This is kind of what I was after. And so we did it in Kiev, and then we did a bigger one in Kharkiv, and then we did it at the huge, wonderful space, Mistetsky Arsenal, the Art Arsenal. And we were doing a rehearsal on the 24th. We had done the first two already, and they were live streamed, and they're up on our website. And on the 24th, and the Arsenal staff was going to join, and we were going to have all these statistics and all these 3D models, and it was all so cool. And that morning, when we were supposed to do it on the 24th, I got a note from Olena, who's the director of the Art Arsenal, and she said she didn't know if she could be there, and could I just show the slides and talk for her. And I said, well, do you have anything written? And she sent me this statement that she was writing to the people who were supposed to come for the book forum, which is their next big event. And it was heartbreaking because the war had started. And this is how I found out about it. And we had one of the poets read it, and it was translated. We sort of edited a little bit, and then we read it. And so it was all happening in real time in my life. It was like that. And right now, like an hour ago, 2 hours ago, I got Zhadan's post about what's happening in Kharkiv now. And it's not a pretty picture.
And this is
I could read you that one if you want. This is this morning, and I mean, it's just what it is. And Zhadan writes, it's like World War II. Ideology and the moral imperative of the invaders comes first. They came to free us from ourselves. They don't even have a convincing version for those faint of heart. They want to simply destroy us, just in case. Just like that. The Russians are barbarians. A tribunal awaits them. Quite frankly, there's no other way.
It's such an interesting time right now, in that unlike World War II, we have access to these manifestations of war in social media, and it's not taking letters to go back and forth to find the evidence of what's happening. So there's, with the sort of democratization of information sharing, we're seeing so much more and hearing so much more in real time, and it I don't know, in some way elevates our current experience of conflict. I'm so struck by these Facebook posts of Zhadan, and anyone watching this should certainly stay involved with the rest of the event tonight. Virlana, can you give us a heads up about what to look for tonight? Because I know Zhadan's work will be featured.
Well, at 7 from the Ukrainian Museum, we're going to be showing, there's Yara artists are going to be reading poems by Zhadan, performing them with musicians. And also Julian and Bob and Anthony Coleman are doing a piece that's based on one of the traditional pieces that Julian performs about truth and lies, because, on some level it's wonderful we have social media today, but we also have a lot of lying on social media. And this is not a new problem. Because Julian's song is from the 17th century, and it's exactly about that, about how everybody's lying about what's happening. Because why? Because it was imperial power coming in, and they were telling their own truth all over everybody. So that's one of the things we'll be doing, and then we'll be reading some of these Facebook posts, and we'll put it all together, and you'll be able to see it on our website,
Right.
Yara Arts Group, one word, 2 A's together even, .net. We'll have a link up probably by 10 o'clock tonight.
Yeah, and a couple of other musicians too, right?
True. There's going to be some wonderful musicians. There's going to be Nadim Nariman Asanov, who's a Crimean Tatar, and so we're going to be reading some of the pieces that Zhadan wrote about the Crimean Tatars because they had their homelands destroyed, and then when they returned to Crimea under Ukraine, when the Russians took over, they started bulldozing their homes again.
Thank you, Virlana. I really encourage anyone watching right now to tune back in this evening for these live streams and events from the Ukrainian Museum, because the information and truth received from artists is entirely different from watching the news.
Right. And there's also, I forgot to mention, or it didn't get around to, Susan Hwang is performing 2 pieces by Zhadan, and Eugene Hutz will be there with his own special touch of insanity.
That's what we love at La Mama. As I bring us to a close here, we're going to hear from Julian on the bandura to play us out. Is there anything else you'd like to add here, as we, in the spirit of what you said, what Bob said about Virlana in manifesting the collective dream of what we want to see in the world? What are you thinking in terms of hope right now? What can we put forth into the world in terms of coming to this, creating this dream of peace and hope?
Well, I hope the killing stops, first of all, because that is the biggest dream right now. And we hope that there will be justice also, as opposed to appeasement. And therefore, I think it's really important to support the groups and the artists who are documenting this in Ukraine. You know, groups like the filmmaking group Babylon 13, and there's links on our website, or certainly on my Facebook page about them, and others, who, the photographers, the Ukrainians and the foreign press that is doing an amazing job just hanging in there in Kharkiv and Kiev, trying to report on this really monumental crisis in culture and civilization that's happening right now. And the dream is that we will not forget, because we cannot forget, but that we will be able to sing with clear hearts about all this.
So I'll finish up here with a song that's from the traditional repertoire of my instrument, and the thing which I find. Oh, excuse me, Bob. Did you want to add anything before
No.
I did that? No. Okay. Yeah. The thing which I find so compelling about these songs is that it's the voice and the truth of people who lived hundreds of years ago. They're talking to us, and this is a song about war from people who lived in the area that's being fought over now, probably in the 1600s, when it was being fought over also. And it's just it's a song about war. It's about what happens. It's about what's left after the battle. It's about, the body of the warrior in the field, and how important it is to have to give it a proper burial. Ой, полі на могилі, гей, ой, у полі на могилі, на широкій Україні, гей, на широкій Україні, лежить козак там убитий, гей, лежить козак там убитий, Китайкою він прикритий, гей, Китайкою він прикритий. On a grave mound in the field, there a warrior lies unburied, with his head on a clod of earth, and the green grass covering his eyes. And a piece of red silk cloth, brought all the way from China, covering his face. Накупину головою, гей, накупину головою, накрив руки нагайкою, гей, накрив ноги нагайкою. А рученьки китайкою, гей, а рученьки китайкою, заслугою козацькою, гей, заслугою козацькою. Лежить козак там убитий, гей, лежить козак там убитий.
Thank you, Julian, for that profound piece. I want to thank you all so much for being here with us, for speaking, for sharing your art with us, for sharing your time. Everyone, please look at yaraartsgroup.net. You can find information about the Stand with Ukraine event at the Ukrainian Museum tonight. That is on East 6th Street, correct? And there is limited seating, but you can attend. You can also tune in online and learn more about Yara and other resources. If you'd like to learn more about how you can support Ukraine right now, whether supporting refugees or in other ways, razom4ukraine.org is a great source of resources. That's RAZOM for Ukraine.org. Thank you all for being here. We look forward to seeing you tonight.